Family Feud started like any other episode. Lights. Laughter. Two families ready to compete. Steve Harvey walked onto that stage doing what he does best, making people smile, cracking jokes, bringing joy to millions watching at home. But 2 minutes into the game, something changed. Steve stopped mid-sentence. His smile faded. The entire studio froze. Because standing at the podium was an 18-year-old kid whose eyes told us stories Steve couldn't ignore. And what happened next became one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. The cameras kept rolling. The audience fell silent. And Steve Harvey did something that broke every rule in the producer's handbook. He walked away from the game. He left the podium. And he went straight to that teenager. Because sometimes, the script doesn't matter. Sometimes, what matters is the human being standing in front of you, carrying a weight no one else can see. If you want to understand why this moment changed Steve Harvey's life forever, stay with us. Because what that teenager revealed on live television wasn't just a secret. It was a truth so powerful, it shattered everyone in that room. The game had just begun. Steve stood between the two families, holding the mic, reading the first question off the card. Name something people do when they're nervous. Standard question. Easy answers. Contestants were buzzing in, giving typical responses. Bite their nails, tap their feet, fidget with their hands. The scoreboard lit up with points. The audience clapped. Everything was going exactly as planned. But Steve noticed something. On the left podium stood the Carter family. 5 members. All smiling. All supportive. And right in front, at the buzzer, stood 18-year-old Marcus Carter. Tall, thin, wearing a simple button-up shirt his grandmother had ironed that morning. He was trying to smile, trying to keep up with the energy of the game. But his eyes weren't in it. Steve saw that immediately. Marcus had buzzed in for the next question. The board lit up. Name something you'd do if you only had 24 hours left to live. The audience laughed nervously. It was one of those morbid but funny Family Feud questions. Steve grinned, ready to throw in a joke. But before he could say anything, Marcus answered. I'd spend it with my mom. Steve stopped. The joke died on his lips. Because Marcus wasn't playing the game anymore. His voice cracked. His hands gripped the podium. And Steve Harvey, a man who's been on television for decades, recognized pain when he heard it. The producers in the control room expected Steve to move on. Keep the energy up. Get to the next answer. But Steve didn't move. He stood there, staring at Marcus, and then did something no one expected. He put the card down. He turned off his mic. And he walked straight toward the teenager. Hold on, Steve said quietly. Hold on a second. The studio went silent. Cameras zoomed in. The family members behind Marcus exchanged worried glances. Steve stepped closer, his expression no longer that of a game show host. It was the face of a man who'd lived enough life to know when someone was hurting. Son, Steve said gently. You okay? Marcus tried to nod. Tried to hold it together. But the moment Steve asked that question, something broke inside him. His shoulders dropped. His lips trembled. And before he could stop himself, the words came out. My mom passed away 3 weeks ago. The air left the room. You could hear it, the collective intake of breath from 200 people in the audience. Steve's face changed completely. The smile was gone. The entertainer was gone. What stood there now was just a man, looking at a kid who'd lost everything, and choosing not to look away. Steve reached out and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Not for the cameras. Not for the show. Just because that's what you do when someone's breaking in front of you. I'm so sorry, son, Steve whispered. And then louder, to the producers, to the crew, to everyone watching. We're stopping. Right now. We're stopping the game. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Producers were in Steve's ear through the earpiece, trying to get him back on track. Steve, we need to keep moving. We're on a schedule. But Steve pulled the earpiece out and tossed it onto the podium. He wasn't interested in the schedule anymore. He was interested in Marcus. Come here, Steve said, motioning Marcus away from the podium. Come talk to me. Marcus stepped down, his family members watching with tears in their eyes. Steve led him to the center of the stage, away from the game boards, away from the buzzers and points and competition. He sat down on the edge of the stage, legs dangling, and gestured for Marcus to sit beside him. The cameras adjusted. The audience stayed silent. And for the first time in Family Feud history, the show became something else entirely. Talk to me, Steve said. What happened? Marcus took a shaky breath. She had cancer. Stage 4. We knew it was coming, but it doesn't make it easier, you know? She made me promise I'd still come on the show. She loved Family Feud. She watched it every day. Even when she was in the hospital, she'd make the nurses turn it on. She said watching you made her forget about the pain for a little while. Steve's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. She made me promise, Marcus continued, voice breaking, that if we got picked to be on the show, I wouldn't back out. She said, Marcus, you go on that show and you have fun. You represent me. You make Steve Harvey laugh. So I'm here. I'm trying. But it's so hard. Steve didn't say anything for a long moment. He just sat there, next to this kid who was trying so hard to be strong, and let the silence hold space for the grief. Then Steve did something that caught everyone off guard. He took off his suit jacket. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He slid the navy blue jacket off his shoulders, the one he'd worn for countless episodes, the one that had become part of his signature look. And he draped it over Marcus's shoulders. Your mama, Steve said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, is so proud of you. You hear me? She's proud you're here. She's proud you kept your promise. And she's watching you right now, son. I promise you that. Marcus broke. Completely. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. And Steve Harvey, comedian, entertainer, TV legend, wrapped his arms around this teenager and let him cry. No jokes. No punchlines. Just presence. Just humanity. The audience erupted. Not in applause, but in tears. People stood up. Hands over their hearts. Some wiping their eyes. Even the opposing family, who were supposed to be competitors, walked over and surrounded Marcus and Steve in a circle of support. One of the producers later said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen on a set. We weren't making television anymore, he said. We were witnessing something sacred. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Steve stood up, still holding Marcus by the shoulders, and turned to face the cameras. His eyes were red. His voice was steady, but barely. Listen, Steve said, speaking directly to the lens, to the millions of people watching. I've been doing this show for years. I've met thousands of families. I've laughed, I've joked, I've given away cars and money and trips. But every once in a while, you meet someone who reminds you what really matters. This young man right here? He just lost his mother. The most important person in his life. And he showed up today because he made her a promise. That's courage. That's love. That's what it means to honor someone. Steve paused, collecting himself. So here's what we're going to do. Marcus, your family is going to play this game. And win or lose, I don't care. Because you've already won. You've shown more strength than most people will ever know. And I want to make sure you and your family are taken care of. Steve turned to the producers off camera. I want the prize money doubled. I don't care what it takes. This family gets double. And Marcus. He turned back to the teenager, who was still wearing Steve's jacket, still trembling. You keep that jacket. That's yours now. And every time you put it on, I want you to remember that your mama's love is still with you. It's in that jacket. It's in your heart. And it's never leaving. The studio exploded. Standing ovation. 200 people on their feet, clapping, crying, celebrating this moment of pure, unfiltered compassion. The other family joined in, hugging Marcus, hugging Steve, turning what was supposed to be a competition into a family reunion. Marcus looked up at Steve, tears streaming down his face, and said something that would stay with Steve forever. "Thank you for seeing me." Steve nodded. "I see you, son. I see you." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The episode aired 3 weeks later. The producers had debated cutting the moment, worried it was too raw, too emotional for daytime television. But Steve fought for it. "If we cut this," he told them, "we're saying that pain doesn't belong on TV. That grief has to be hidden. And I'm not doing that. People need to see this. They need to know it's okay to break. It's okay to hurt. And it's okay to let someone help you carry it." The episode became the highest-rated Family Feud episode of the season. Not because of the game. Not because of the jokes. But because of that moment. Because millions of people saw Steve Harvey stop being a host and start being a human. They saw Marcus's courage. They saw a community come together. And they were reminded that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stop everything and just be present for someone who's hurting. Marcus later said that moment changed his life. "I was drowning," he admitted in an interview months later. "I didn't know how to keep going without my mom. But Steve showed me that I wasn't alone. That jacket he gave me? I wore it to my mom's memorial service. I wore it to my high school graduation. I still have it hanging in my closet. And every time I see it, I remember that day. I remember that I made my mom proud. I remember that kindness is real." Steve never forgot Marcus either. He talks about that day often, in interviews, in speeches, in quiet moments when people asked him about his favorite moments on television. "That wasn't television," Steve says. "That was life. That was a young man showing me what real strength looks like. And I'm honored I got to be there for him." The jacket became a symbol. Not just for Marcus, but for everyone who saw that episode. It represented something bigger than fabric and thread. It represented the idea that when someone is breaking, you don't walk past them. You stop. You sit with them. You give them something, anything that says, "I see you. You matter. You're not alone." Steve Harvey built a career on making people laugh. But that day, he reminded the world that the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't laughter. It's presence. It's compassion. It's the willingness to break your own rules, stop your own show, and say to another human being, "I'm here. And you're going to be okay." That's the legacy of that moment. Not the ratings. Not the viral clips. But the simple, profound truth that we all need someone to stop for us when life gets too heavy to carry alone. And sometimes, if we're lucky, that someone is willing to take off their jacket, wrap it around our shoulders, and remind us that we're not walking this road by ourselves. Marcus kept his promise to his mother. He showed up. He played the game. He represented her with courage and grace. And in doing so, he gave Steve Harvey, and everyone watching, a gift far greater than any game show prize. He reminded us all what it means to be human. Years later, Steve would reflect on that moment in ways that surprised even him. "I've interviewed presidents," he said during a late-night talk show appearance. "I've met celebrities, billionaires, people the world considers successful. But Marcus? That teenager who lost his mom and still showed up. That's the bravest person I've ever met. And he taught me something I'll never forget." The host asked what Marcus had taught him. Steve paused, his eyes distant, remembering that day on the Family Feud stage. "He taught me that being present is the greatest gift you can give someone. Not advice. Not money. Not even hope. Just being there. Stopping everything and saying, 'I see your pain, and I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist.' That's what changes people. That's what saves lives." Marcus went on to finish high school, then college. He became a grief counselor, working with teenagers who'd lost parents. When people asked why he chose that path, he always mentioned Steve. He showed me that you don't have to have all the answers, Marcus explained. You just have to show up. You just have to care. That jacket he gave me became my reminder that even in our darkest moments, there are people who will stop their entire world just to sit with us in ours. The jacket still hangs in Marcus's office. Visitors often ask about it, noticing it's too big for him, clearly not his size. And Marcus tells them the story. Every single time. Because some stories aren't meant to be kept private. Some stories are meant to be shared, passed on, used to remind others that compassion isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have. Steve Harvey changed that day too. He became more intentional about the moments that mattered. He started a foundation specifically for kids who lost parents, making sure they had resources, support, and people who understood their pain. Marcus inspired that, Steve said at the foundation's launch. He showed me that we can't just entertain people and think we've done our job. We have to see them. Really see them. And when we do, we have to act. That episode continues to circulate online. It's been viewed millions of times, shared across every platform, translated into dozens of languages. And every time someone watches it, they're reminded of a simple but profound truth. In a world that tells us to keep moving, to stay on schedule, to follow the script, sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is stop. Stop and be human. Stop and care. Stop and remind someone that they matter more than any game, any show, any agenda. That's the legacy of the day Steve Harvey broke down on Family Feud. Not because he cried. Not because he gave away his jacket. But because he chose a person over a production. He chose compassion over entertainment. And in doing so, he reminded millions of people that the best thing we can be in this life isn't successful, or famous, or powerful. It's present. It's kind. It's human.